Thank you, Father Steve, and thank you all for being here. I suppose I won't forget the message that I received barely a week ago from NEWSMAX President Chris Ruddy that Michael had passed. And at that point, memories of mine just flooded through my mind. I remember the first time that I met Michael Reagan. It was in the summer of 1979. I was a young reporter then, just starting my career, and I was covering a straw poll that Florida Republicans were putting on for the upcoming presidential election. Governor Reagan was coming as a candidate, but Michael and his wife Colleen were already there. And I was new to the business. He was pretty well known because he'd campaigned for a lot of people and, of course, for his dad. But he still made time for me and talked at length about how they hoped to win. And something that probably many of you couldn't see today or picture was we were in the corner and both smoking cigarettes at the time. Now, shortly after that, in fact, a couple of years, Michael let me know that he had kicked the habit. In fact, he did so on Guy Fawkes Day in 1982 and told me I should follow his example. And I did 20 years later. And I am glad that I did, certainly. Michael had quite a life, to say the least. He often liked to tell people how when his father was elected governor, he said, "Oh boy, Dad's going to give me a big job in Sacramento." Well, then he found out otherwise. His dad told him that he hated nepotism, that he particularly did not like the way President Kennedy had made his brother Bobby Attorney General, and he would not give him a job. "You chart your own course," Governor-elect Reagan said to his son, and Michael certainly did. He worked in the catering business, in the clothing business. He raced speedboats, and then launched his career, as David previously brought to life, in radio, and of course, as a best-selling author, and then as columnist and guest commentator on NEWSMAX. I was privileged to be on his radio program with him a number of times when he called. In his autobiography, The Greatest, Muhammad Ali recalls checking into a hotel in 1968 here in California. And as he was checking in, the champ, who at that time was stripped of his heavyweight title because he refused to enlist in the military on the grounds of religious beliefs, he spotted, and I quote, "a handsome boy looking at me in the hotel lobby." And he went up to him and said, "What's your name, young man?" And the young man said, "Michael Reagan." And at that point, Ali said, "Well, the only Reagan I know is Governor Reagan, and he's saying I'm unpatriotic because of my stand on the military." And the young man looked at him and gave him a clenched fist salute to let him know that while he was the son of the governor who disagreed with Ali, he was in support of him. Now, I asked Mike many years later, "Is that story true?" He said, "Yes, that's what I believed, and he was right about me being a handsome boy." And of course, Muhammad Ali did endorse President Reagan for re-election in 1984, and years later, Michael gave him an award for a foundation with which he was affiliated, and quite proud of that. Michael had various jobs, as I said, and here's something that many of you may not even know. He was once a guest on the popular daytime show, The Dating Game. And as you may remember or may not remember, a female contestant would ask questions of 3 eligible bachelors behind a screen. She didn't know their names or what they looked like. And then she picked the mystery date. Michael won, and in the process beat the then teen idol and heartthrob Sal Mineo, something he was very proud of. Of course, to most of you, Michael was the son of the 40th President Ronald Reagan and his wife, Academy Award winner Jane Wyman, star of TV's long-running Falcon Crest. But to those who knew him closely, and many of you are here, and certainly I felt this way, he was the husband of Colleen and the father of Ashley and Cameron and the grandfather, because he talked about them in virtually every conversation we had over 4 decades. Michael loved the fact that my wife and his shared the same first name, Colleen, and whenever he would call, he would say, "My Colleen is doing great. How's yours?" And then in later years, my Colleen was in a long battle against dementia. Michael would call and I'd put the phone on speaker, and he would recite the early chants of the traditional Latin Mass of the Catholic Church, which he learned as a young boy and an altar boy. As he liked to tell me, I saw my mom baptized and confirmed. How many can say that? And my wife, in the throes of dementia, could still chant the responses in Latin. That sticks with you when I go to Catholic school. And of course, on Christmas Eve 3 years ago, when my wife went to heaven, Michael called and said, "Think positive. She's going to be welcomed by my mom and dad." And now I feel strongly that Michael will join my Colleen and his mom and dad and his sisters, Maureen and Christine. You know, the Catholic philosopher Teilhard de Chardin once said that pessimism is a mortal sin. So let me be optimistic and close on a high note. If I should be fortunate when my time comes to go to heaven, I'm going to listen closely for the tinkle of champagne glasses, for laughter, and particularly a raucous laugh, and someone telling some great stories to cheer me up. Then I know I'll see Michael once again. Thank you very much.
Information. Truth is freedom. Is NEWSMAX. It's real news for real people.